So, fear of rejection. As men, we feel this fear of rejection so deeply. We feel we're going to be ostracized. We feel we're going to be embarrassed. We're going to be pushed away. And most men aren't really struggling in dating because they're not attractive, or they don't make enough money, or they're not tall enough. You will tell yourself this again and again. But the truth is, most men are failing because they're afraid, right? They're afraid of rejection. They're afraid of what the rejection will mean about them. They're afraid that rejection will mean that they're not good enough, right? Men are afraid of being seen and not chosen. But here's the thing when it comes to rejection and the fear of it and how it gets in the way of you expressing yourself and moving forward towards the woman you want, the relationship you desire, right? It will quietly ruin your dating life, right? Forever, if you don't do something about it. And I say this as someone who has worked with men for over 20 years, working on this whole piece around the fear of rejection. And I know men who have conquered it and their lives are fantastic, right? And I know men who never bothered, and those men's lives are tragically sad. And I don't want that to be for you, right? So where should we start? We're going to talk about, you know, what the fear of rejection is, right? Where it kind of shows up in men's lives. I'm going to talk about the hidden cost because it's really important to see the cost. I'm going to talk about the reframe, and I'm also going to talk about the fallacy, right, around the fear of rejection. And I'm going to talk about the work that you need to do to shift it, because there's stuff you can do, right? There's very real things you can do to change it, right? But in this day and age, in this modern time, it's too easy to avoid rejection, right? Because you can use dating apps, for instance, for dating, and you can feel like you're trying in dating while buffering against real rejection, right? That real pain of sitting in front of a woman and her, ignoring you, or going up to a woman in the street and her not talking to you, because those things are perfectly acceptable to do. Like, I know a lot of people say you can't go and talk to women in the street, or you can't go and talk to women in a bar or in a restaurant or wherever, but you can. I speak to a lot of women through my work, and they're dying for men to approach them well. Very key to do it well, to not be creepy, to not be weird, to not be harassive, but to do it well and to do it with confidence. But not talking about approaching today. I'm talking about the fear of rejection. Fear of rejection has nothing to do with women, right? You think it's to do with women, but it's not. It's all about what you make rejection mean. Yeah. Because what a lot of us do is we think that if a woman rejects us, it means I'm not good enough, I'm not attractive, I'm unlovable. But it gets deeper than that. It means I'm going to be alone forever. I'm going to have this experience forever. No one's ever going to want to be with me, right? This pain I experience now is going to be my continual experience. That's what starts to be felt underneath the hood, right? And I'm going to take it another level deeper because, like I said, I've worked with tons and tons of men around this, right? I had a particular client right now who's dealing with this fear of rejection. He's just come to me. Ultimately, for a lot of men, when it comes to this fear of rejection, because like approaching someone or expressing desire in someone and so forth is a vulnerable act, there's a vulnerability in it, right? Because we aren't trained to deal with vulnerability with courage very well, right? We're taught in avoidance. We're taught to back away from difficult emotional aspects, not necessarily physical things, but particularly emotional things. We back away, or we buffer it in some way, or we try and pretend to be someone we're not, right? That's a lot of what we learn. It means that our fear of rejection gets activated because we're afraid of revealing ourselves, right? Be that an approach, be that in a woman that you know, or telling you like her, or so forth, right? And then being rejected would be signs of a lack of acceptance and a lack of decency and goodness in who you are. Because the story sometimes we run is, if I was a good man or I was a good enough man, women wouldn't reject me. And that's not true. Yeah. I can tell you the most successful men I know with women, I know some incredibly successful men when it comes to women, right? They get rejected more than the unsuccessful men. Let me tell you that again. The successful men, when it comes to dating, it comes to rejection, they get rejected more than the unsuccessful men, right? Because they're trying more. Yeah. And the difference is they don't see the rejection as meaning something fatal about who they are and their character, right? Because what you're probably experiencing is, right, you have some interest in a woman, then there's a level of activation, nervousness, fear, worry, feeling of inadequacy, assuming they're not going to be into you. Then there's a self-consciousness. You suddenly become really conscious of who you are. Then there's an inferiority, right, that comes up. And then there's a level of shame, right, or assuming failure, right, or assuming the meaning of the failure. And then this emotional mountain causes you to withdraw and fall back and not do anything. And then that falling back starts to bring up more feelings of inadequacy, of inferiority, of insecurity. So it's a bit of it's a bit of a loop, right? Because it kind of it's a vicious circle, because you keep finding yourself of interest, right? Because you're going to be interested in women, and then you dive deeper in because you have more activation, you have more evidence of the feelings of self-consciousness, inferiority, shame, and failure, because you keep not taking action. Yeah. And then you keep putting all the meaning on the rejection when it happens, right? So let's get a bit more into this, right? Where does this come from? Let me just pull up my notes here. So a lot of what happens to men is that we've experienced some level of rejection in our lives, right? So it might be that you were embarrassed at school or something, because embarrassment can feel like rejection, can feel like being pushed away from the group. Maybe you were ignored when it came to picking sports teams or any sort of teams or picking type things at school, right? Or you felt that your parents rejected you, right? They weren't interested in your opinions. They weren't interested in the things you were interested in, you wanted to do with yourself. You felt the rejection there, right? So, and this is the thing, then you have this experience of rejection, this pain, because it feels painful, right? Being rejected. You might say, oh, I don't care, but really that's your way to avoid having to feel the pain of being rejected, because it's uncomfortable, right? And as I said, men and boys, we're not taught to deal with our emotional pain very well. We just want to run away from it. We're taught avoidance. So you're trying to avoid this feeling of rejection, right? Which makes sense from an evolutionary point of view. If rejection was going to kill you, but it isn't, you'll get over it in minutes, literally, if not seconds sometimes, when you really learn what to do. And what you're trying to do is you avoid feeling that, right? So when you think of even approaching someone, the fear of rejection is trying to protect you in a way that your nervous system, your body has learned to protect you from saber-toothed tigers and lions and animals that really could do you damage. When really the woman across the way that you think is cute is not going to eat you alive. Even if you come in the comment section and tell me, women, they do this, they do that, they can hurt you in these ways. The key is having the emotional resilience, because that's really sets aside the successful men in dating and the unsuccessful men, right? So what does it look like in a man? What does it look like when you have this fear of rejection? You don't approach women. That's the really obvious one. You don't show interest when it's there, right? Maybe you're waiting for them to show enough interest first. You don't really speak up and communicate with the women who you are talking with, because you're afraid that if you show too much interest, that could lead to her rejecting you. You don't open up and share who you are. This could be a general thing. This also happens in life as well. You overthink text messages. Yeah, trying to get it right. You play it cool. I did this a lot, playing it cool, right? This is often men's avenue for this, trying to play it cool. Like, oh, if I'm cool, it's okay if she rejects me. I don't care. It doesn't matter. I don't care. That's often where we go. Sometimes we become a nice guy. Yeah. Got loads of episodes about nice guys if you're interested in that. Become a nice guy, people pleaser. How can I do everything so that she likes me and I never do anything she dislikes? That's the mechanism. It doesn't work in the long term. It just makes you frustrated and resentful. Um, and then there's the kind of preemptive rejection. This can come in the guise of men who are like, there's no good women out there, or no women are loyal, or there's no women I find attractive. That's another one. Or having very high standards can be a way to avoid rejection as well. I mean, very high, particularly physical standards, and even personality standards is another way to avoid rejection. Because if no one's good enough, then hey, you're not really going for anyone, and you can't be rejected. That's a really common one for a lot of men that come to me, right? And then there's another one it can even be more cruel, and is like a detachment. Yeah, arrogance, detachment, and ego. This is where we might be really full of bravado, think we're the fucking shit, like that sort of. That is another way we buffer against the fear of rejection, right? And what most men think, right, is that they have a strategy problem. I need to learn these 5 things. I need to say these 10 things. I need to wear a silly hat, as Mystery did back in the day, right? But actually, You have a host of problems that are not about strategy. It's not external, it's internal problems. You have an avoidance problem. You're avoiding difficult emotions, right? You're avoiding uncomfortable situations. Yeah. So you have an emotional problem, but you also have an identity problem, right? And when I say identity problem, is that there's an identity that you would like to be. Yeah. Over here, the identity you would like to be. But there's this identity that you fear is true about you. Yeah. So you want to believe that you're a good man, that you're interesting, that you're cool, that you're funny. Yeah. But over here is that little voice in your head, that little asshole voice in your head that says things to you that you don't want to hear. The inner critic, you could call it. Again, I've got whole podcast episodes about the inner critic. This little voice is telling you you're a piece of shit. You're ugly. Women will never like you. You're going to be alone forever. You don't know how to talk to women. Things like that. You know the vibe. You heard it. I've heard it, right? And you're fighting against this identity because you want this to be true, but this is the thing you fear. And whenever you hear rejection, you feel rejection. I don't know why I'm doing these hand signals, but whenever you fear rejection, right? This is only relevant to those watching the video. Whenever you hear these little things, you fear that that identity, the one you don't want to be true, the one that your little inner critic tells you, you don't want to be true. Whenever you feel rejection, you feel like this one is more true and you want to run away from that feeling, right? And I'm here to tell you, the thing is on the other side of that identity you don't want to be true is the one you want to create and be, right? But you have to go through it. You can't go over it. You can't go under it. You can't go around it. And I say that because that's a little book that I read beyond, and it has those sentences in it. It's very profound about moving through difficulty. You have to go through it. Yeah, that is the only way, right? You could do some looks maxing and you think that that's going to buff you from rejection. It will not. You will still experience rejection. It would hurt you even more because you spent ages trying to look better, right? Don't do the hammer thing. You don't need the hammer thing, please. When I see that, it makes me feel really queasy to see that there's another thing, right, about fear of rejection that a lot of people do not talk about. And this is the fact that ultimately, right, what you start to do is you start to look for evidence of rejection before it's happened to buffer yourself against rejection. This is something we do when we fear rejection. Oh, that woman over there who I could like, she obviously looks like she has a boyfriend. I'm not going to talk to her. Yeah. You find evidence to buffer against rejection. Oh, actually, I don't like her that much. Her hair is a bit funny. Another fault you find to buffer you against rejection, right? Doesn't help. And this can also be inside relationships where also you're dating somebody is when maybe you see signs that you can't speak up and show who you are because she said once that she doesn't like guys that do X, Y, and Z. So you can't say that. So you found evidence already for that rejection. The hidden cost. The hidden cost ultimately is loneliness. Yeah. And a lot of you guys might be going, oh, but David, it's peace. You know, I've got this peace without a woman. And I'm going to do an episode about this bullshit around peace. But I'll say this, human beings' lives have never really been peaceful and they're never meant to be. Peace doesn't lead to evolution. It often leads to some level of stagnation in a human being, in their mind. Like peace now isn't peace, it's avoidance. Yeah. It's avoiding anything that feels uncomfortable because we're so used to comfort. So what does it look like? The cost. Not being with the women you'd really love to be with, right? Not enjoying yourself. There's a joy that comes in being able to communicate and play and flirt with the women you want, right? There's a singleness you're going to experience, right? You're going to be single, pretend it's fine, and pretend that ache that you have for closeness is going away, but it's not, right? You might stay stuck in the place you're in now. Yeah. You might feel seriously isolated. This is the one that's most common. I think this happened a lot on men is this isolation, social isolation, emotional isolation, connection isolation, hunger for connection as well, right? This deep desire for connection and also a lack of sexual connection happens out of the back of this fear of rejection. And then there's a self-loathing that happens. That is the real cost, I think, the self-loathing that occurs as well. Yeah. Because ultimately, as much as you'll think it's about confidence, if I get confidence from thinking, if I get new strategies and I learn what to say and what to do, then I'm never going to be rejected, and then I'm going to feel confident. It doesn't fucking work. I can tell you that. You have to go through it, right? You have to go through it. Some of the emotions you have to go through, and there's also some deeper work, which I'll talk about afterwards, right? But there's this reframe I need you to think about, right? Because this is part of the shift in mindset. Rejection is not a sign that you are not good enough, right? It's a sign, it's a feedback signal, yeah, about your behavior or about the offer you're putting forward, right? Because people aren't rejecting you because they don't know you at your depth, right? Because A, you're not showing them, yeah? Usually what you show them is your fear, your insecurities, your worries, or even your inauthenticity, right? You're just pretending to be someone else and then they reject that. That's not who you are, is it? Right? You know that. I know that. Or maybe you put in an offer, right? You know, when you meet a woman, you go and talk in a bar or a club or over text message, you're presenting an offer of like, hey, come out with me for a date. Yeah. That's the offer. She doesn't know you. She's just handling the offer that you've put forward. That's it. That's not who you are. You're not the offer. You're the human being that has multiple layers. You're like a multi-dimensional human being, but she doesn't get to see that yet. So is she rejecting you, or is she just rejecting the offer that you put in front of her? Important for you to know. Why? Because combined with the idea that no one's rejecting you, they're just rejecting the offer. And two, it's just a feedback signal. If you start to analyze these correctly, right, and place meaning in the right places, like, oh, actually, I can see where I didn't really express myself when I went up to this woman, or actually, I wasn't open, I wasn't playful, I was too attached to her liking me and not liking me. You know, I need to be less attached because I can speak to 100 women in a day if I'd like to. Yeah. You start to shift the meaning from, if she rejects me, it means I'm a piece of shit, to, I learned something in this moment about how my behavior is being at the offer I'm creating. Yeah. Very important, right? It's really game changing. Now, the real work, I've given you some like mental work there. The real work really is emotional and identity piece, right? You have to shift the emotional patterns. You have to shift the identity that sits underneath that, right? Because if you don't do this fear of rejection will always be there. Yeah. It just will be. You have to do this. Like I spent many years doing the kind of what would I say? Like leaning in work, doing the mental work, doing the actions. And it wasn't until I got older that I started to look at the deeper aspects, like the shadow work, like the inner critic stuff, the emotions that I wasn't willing to go near, some of the inner child stuff that's come up, right? About what my past experiences of rejection and meaning meant, and healing those at an emotional and a nervous system level, as well as the nervous system work around creating regulation, around creating spaciousness, and also some of the kind of mind body work, which allows us through often some practicing around mindfulness that allows us to create a healthy detachment in these situations, right? So there's this deeper work you need to do. Now, a lot of us shy away from that. You're just going to want to listen to more videos about this, but that's not going to solve your problem. It's not. I can tell you that, because you can watch 100 videos and it'll make no difference, because this is the work you need to do. And this is the very work that I do inside of Relate with Men, right? And the men that are coming in to relate, they're really seeing it, in their relationships and their single lives, that how they operate with rejection just through how they start to shift emotionally, and they start to shift the mental bits and pieces I've told you, and the identity pieces. So if you're willing to do that work, and you need to, because it's not just this fear of rejection, yeah, it's your inability to communicate. It's the inability to show up emotionally and be that man, that grounded masculine man that you want to be. It's also that. So if you're wanting to do that work, Relate is where we do that work. And I'm opening up some spots in May. So if you're interested, there's a link below. You can add yourself to the wait list. And if there's enough space for you, I'll invite you in when I finish up there. Ciao, ciao.